Welcome back, fish heads. Tony Baber here with part 2 of our pre-spawn videos series. This part we're going to dive into the Navionics web app, and I'm going to show you basically how I would break down a lake for pre-spawn fishing. Everything from where the winter haunts are to those first early pre-spawn staging areas onto the secondary, and as they push back into the pockets, as well as a little bit on some of the spawn areas to look for. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so we're going to move on to the desktop here and we'll cover kind of what I look at as far as breaking down a lake and really kind of establishing a pattern. So I've used Cave Run Lake here as my example. I've never actually been to this lake. I don't know anything about it. I've barely even looked at this map, just did a little bit of preliminary research of it before shooting this video. So I've got an area here that I want to start off in and kind of give you guys an idea. So what I'm looking for when I'm looking at a map, kind of preparing for whether it's a tournament or a pre-spawn fishing trip, you know, March, April, depending on where you're at in the country. But what I'm looking for is, or where I start off is, digging through a lake and trying to find where are those fish going to winter at. Where are they going to be at when the water temperature is at its coldest and they're at their slowest kind of metabolism and slowest activity for the year. What kind of areas are those fish going to look for? Are they going to kind of winter in, so to speak? So what I found here at this lake in particular was this really kind of cool area or interesting area where you have the main river channel kind of rolling through here, and then you've got this really kind of dynamic creek channel that comes out at the mouth of this pretty big creek that runs off to the west here. And it's got like a little bit of width to it here where it's almost like the river channel size, and then you've got this one main creek area of it that kind of splinters off of it and runs a little bit deeper and kind of snakes around through here. So I thought this would be a really good area for those fish to kind of push and winter in, because you've got access to really deep water, you've got access to the shallow kind of bluff type wall areas here towards the shoreline, but then you've got these just unique structures with the points and the hump kind of out here. Yes, it's in 40 to 50 foot of water, but those fish aren't going to be afraid of those kind of depths if they're on a lake that's deeper like this. So I thought this would be a great area to just kind of focus in on. So if you're in those 48 to 50 degree temperatures coming in early in the spawn period or pre-spawn period, this is the kind of area that you might want to dig into or start really looking at. And this would be something where you could throw like those wiggle warts, or maybe even break out some 5XDs or 6XDs, getting into that deeper water, reaching down and just trying to locate anything that might be out here kind of roaming between this channel here and the shoreline on this side. So what I typically would do is throw something like that, maybe bust out something like a drop shot, kind of keying in on some of these areas, scanning it obviously with your depth finders to see if there's anything there, or if there's any unique kind of cover elements that are maybe flooded underneath the water. So this would be where you'd start. And then as you start getting into that 50 to maybe 53 degree water temperature range, and you start getting into that really early pre-spawn area to where the fish are going to start looking for or pushing back to or finding their creeks that they typically would go into to maybe spawn. So this area here I thought presented a really great opportunity, because you've got your winter area here where maybe they're going to hold out here in this deeper wall, on this deeper wall, or in these deeper channels here, but then that all pushes along right here into this 3-point little area here, which is great because it covers basically different times of that spawn as they start pushing back into that creek. So when it's first things first, you're probably going to look here at this point here, because it's got this nice little shelf here, but then it drops off real quick. So if it's still early, or if you've got maybe some cooler weather that's kind of messing with them and they're not wanting to get super aggressive and moving really far, this is going to be a great staging point for them, a good primary point or first kind of stop and staging point for those fish. The next spot that, and you could even use this in both instances, is going to be this point here. So this point here is really unique because it rolls so far out into the lake and it dumps off right into that creek channel that you're kind of coming from as far as for the winter. So if those fish happen to follow this channel back, this is going to be the first place that they're going to stop, because you've got both channels kind of pushing in here on these fish, or on these on this point here. You've got both things kind of pushing in here, which is a great spot. You got this nice flat up here at the top of it, and something like this is where I'm gonna start keying in with those jig, the football jig, throwing like that 3/4 ounce, or throwing the shell buster with the adrenaline crawl attached to it, and just dragging this point, really covering it in depth, and really just slow and methodical, because you're in that lower 50s kind of temperature range, and that's when those crawfish are going to become more active. So you want to do something with that to try to capitalize on that bite. And then this is where a good spot to throw the wiggle wart, the 1.5 flat, because you can cover this whole point almost, or a lot of it, based on the depth that you're seeing here. And then as you start pushing back and you get into the warmer weather and you're getting into that 53 to 57 degree range maybe, this might be the last spot, maybe those last bit of winter fish that are pushing in. This is probably going to be the last point that they're going to be sitting on, is right here, because this is leading into a really good highway here for them to push back into this first pocket. So let's assume that maybe this is a really good spawning pocket on this lake when you get into that springtime spawn. And this right here is going to be a great spot when you get into that warmer temperature of the 55 to 60 degree range, because this is a good highway. It's a nice big flat for them to push slowly along and really get back towards the back of that. This is where I'm going to really throw that 1.5 flat, the 2.5 type square bills, the 4.0s, just stuff that's going to cover that flat really well and really aggressively, because those fish are going to be moving all along this. So you want to have something more of a power presentation to be able to cover this kind of flat. And then as you start getting into that spawn time and getting into where they're really going to start looking for that creek that they want to be in, this kind of point here is going to be a good spot. This is that last little turn before they start pushing in there. So really keying in on these kind of areas with your square bills, with some of your deep divers, maybe even getting into your chatterbait bite a little bit as you start pushing back into this shallower water and pushing on these edges here in the shallower type water areas. That's where you want to start keying in with those kind of baits, and maybe even the spinner baits a little bit too. And then as we push back here, I thought this was kind of a really unique thing, but something that I have seen before on, like, Lake Cumberland has a spot kind of similar to this. Dale Hollow has a spot that's similar to this, and this is something it's mostly like midway back to mostly far back into that creek pocket, as you can see overall. And this spot area, if you can, or this spot or area, if you can find something like this that's on your lake or your body of water, it's going to be a really good spot to look at when you get those cold days that come through. So when you start really getting into that spawn where they're really pushing up and making beds, this is something that you're going to want to look for when you get that cold front that pushes through for a couple days, or maybe something like a cold rain, or just anything that's really going to kind of upset those fish from being in that shallow water. This is a good fallback point for them, because you've got up to 30 foot of depth right here. You've got this little hump, and it's the creek channels running along this. You got this bluff wall right here. This is going to be a great spot to really look into if you get those cold weather kind of upset that comes along with that springtime fishing that we all have seen before and has really kind of messed up our patterns. This is going to be something that I'm going to look for them fish to fall back to, because it's close to these pockets across the lake on the north side, and it's also close to the main flat back here in the back of the creek. So really look for something like this and really try to capitalize on that. And that's going to be where you can get into your shaky head bites, or your finesse cranking kind of crankbaits, or like your flat-sided crankbaits, stuff like that. Those are going to be things that I would throw along this area. You start getting out here on this point, maybe throwing those jigs, slowing down a little bit, but that's going to be a good spot. So hopefully this gives you guys some ideas of just something to look for, and kind of how I break down an area of a lake, just trying to figure out what I want to look at for pre-spawn, because the tricky part is when you get into that middle pre-spawn to spawn time frame is you can find fish basically from the beginning to the very back of these creeks. So you want to really identify what's going to be the main highways, the main areas that these fish are going to stop at or look for when they're pushing back into these creeks to really get into that spawn time. So good luck to you guys, good fishing, and I hope you enjoyed.